I have reading projects that tend to take years for me to complete, and I'm now to the point that I have books that are going to take me years to complete. I've got 4 books over here, and I want to talk about why each one of them is going to take me more than a year to finish reading them. Some of them I've been reading for over a year already. You know, let's get right into it. Each one of them kind of has a different reason why it's going to take so long. Let's start with the one with the most obvious reason, and that is Gotham, A History of New York City to 1898. This book is huge. Look at this thing. It's gigantic. It won the Pulitzer Prize, and well, it's a history of New York. I mean, it starts in prehistoric times and goes all the way up to 1898. And the book is very, very good. It's over 1,300 pages long. It's 67 hours on audiobook, and the audiobook is very good, but you got to chip away at it. Same thing as you would with this book physically. I don't know how anyone reviewed this thing. This is a tome, but I'm very glad that it exists. I absolutely love history, and I want to savor every page in that book. So I am taking my sweet time, because if you just let that just fire hose your brain, you're not going to remember any of it. I mean, I'm only 20% of the way through it, and we're only at 1785, something like that. It's kind of crazy how much of that book is just going to be the next 100 years. So we're talking the 1790s to the 1890s is 1,000 pages. I can't wait to get into it. It has been so fascinating. There's just something amazing about a book that is that comprehensive about a city. And what's really crazy is there's a sequel, Greater Gotham, I think is what it's called. And I have a copy of that too. That will take forever. It's almost this big. It only covers 1898 to 1919, which 1919 is one hell of a year. I want to read a bunch of books about that, but maybe that's a future project. But this isn't all nonfiction, so you've probably already left because I spoke about a history book, is Don Quixote. And it kind of has the same reason. This book is huge, but it also doesn't. I want to savor this. I really, really enjoy Don Quixote. I've gotten, I don't even know, maybe 10% of the way through it, and I'm having a blast. Don Quixote is amazing. All these goofy characters, all these crazy stories. It's just so fun that I don't want it to end. And so I have used it as a palate cleanser between books. I did the same thing with the Sherlock Holmes collection on Audible, narrated by Stephen Fry. That's every Sherlock Holmes story that was ever written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And I just used those between like Malazan and other stuff and just used it to reset my brain. And it was so good. So I'm going to do the same thing with Don Quixote. It's just way too good to blast through, because I don't see myself rereading it anytime soon because it's so big. So I'm more than happy to just enjoy it and just savor the process of reading that beautiful book. Now, the next one is another history book, and this is The Structures of Everyday Life by Fernand Braudel. It's Civilization and Capital, 15th to 18th Century, Volume 1. Now, this one is probably going to take me a year to read, but there are at least 2 more. But this thing is absolutely fascinating. This is a historian look at the economics of the 15th to 18th century, which sounds incredibly dull. And sometimes it is. I skip over the math and the graphs. Those do not entertain me at all. But I've learned some very valuable things so far in this book, like the importance of potatoes in Europe. For the same amount of land, you get almost twice as much food growing potatoes versus wheat, which is why it was so important to places like Ireland, where wheat didn't really grow very well anyways. It also talks about how early on you had like less than 10,000 soldiers and they conquered Italy. So it puts into perspective the amount of soldiers that would have been in a place around the 15th or 16th century. Because you read fiction all the time that's kind of placed in that setting, and it's like there were 250,000 soldiers around the wall, and it's like that's impossible. I mean, I guess it might have happened, but they would have starved to death within the month without like any resupply. So it puts a lot of that into perspective in a way I hadn't really thought about, and that is where I'm coming at this book. I like it because it's history, but I also like it because it kind of gets the ball rolling in my head about all these different fantasy settings that take place in what would be considered this. I mean, you look at like the tabletop RPG Pathfinder, they look at their timeline as it's like 1835, but without the steam engine or guns, which there are some guns, but that kind of makes sense to me. They've got running water and stuff like that. So it's not this like regressive, terrible place to live like you would see in Dungeon Crawl Classics, which is like, you know, 800 AD and everything sucks. Yeah, this book has just been really good. It's definitely helped me kind of frame the way I look at historical settings in fantasy and in historical fiction, and it's helped me become a better educated reader so I can be more critical of things, because that's what we need in this world, is to be more critical of things. But anyways, it's been a great read so far. I definitely recommend it. Shout out to Steve Leto here on YouTube, the Best Law channel. He said that it is his favorite history book, and the man taught history at the college levels, and he's a literal historian. So I was like, all right, man, sold. I picked up a copy almost immediately upon his recommendation, and it's definitely been worth it. This last one is also the smallest book, which is really saying something, and that's Lost Worlds by Clark Ashton Smith. Man, that glare. Love dust jacket protectors, but man, they really don't agree with lighting. And Lost Worlds by Clark Ashton Smith is a very small book. I mean, it's like 400 pages. But the problem is your boy Clark Ashton Smith has some very dense writing. Dense to the point that I am like, oh man, this is overwhelming. I tried audio of some of his stuff and it literally would not stick in my brain. I don't know what happened. I can't remember any of it except for the vibes, which is cool, except I kind of want to remember things. So what I'm doing with this is I'm reading one of the stories every month or two so I can just really enjoy it and take my time. And the first story stuck in my head. It was great. The first story is The Tale of Satampra Zyros, and it was very good. And the thing about that one is it starts out kind of like a Lord Dunsany style story. It's very dreamlike with his style of writing. He's in like this fantasy medieval city, and then you're following this thief and his homies, and they figured out this heist they're gonna do, but they're kind of stupid and they have to jump out of town early because they had to pay rent. And they thought, well, if we leave town before our landlord shows up, he'll have to wait for us to come back, and then we can pay rent and everything will be okay. We gotta go make this big heist. And so they take off, and then they're like, well, do we get mules or do we get food? Because the mules would carry treasure, but the food would keep us alive, and they're just kind of stupid. So anyways, they finally get to this place where there's like this tomb or something, and they want to raid it. And the jungle they're in is very creepy, and they're like freaking out as they get there. And like Clark Ashton Smith is the vibe writer. I mean, he can really set the tone. And so I was having a great time. I think I read it in like one sitting. And I get to the part where they're in the tomb, and I'm like, man, this has got some vibes, a little creepy. This is cool. They're going to this tomb, and it's like, then it like shifts gears and becomes nightmare fuel. Like, I thought that just the jungle was nightmare fuel, but no, this whole story is nightmare fuel. There's this monster in there, and it ends up murdering two of them, and the final guy is like getting away, and he's trying to escape, and I'm not going to tell you what happens to him, but holy crap, you talk about a super intense story. And it was just like this build up, and you don't know what's going on, and it's getting creepier and creepier, and then it's just like wham, and you're like, holy crap, this is not fun. I am freaking out right now. I loved it. Had I listened to it, or had I binged his work, I would not be able to remember this. So Clark Ashton Smith's books are going to take me years to complete. And so that means we're going to be spending the next decade reading Clark Ashton Smith. I had to check on the shelf and see how many I had of his works, and I'll be getting more. This whole thing is just a way of me talking about sometimes you just need to take your time with some books. Don't plow through them because it will ruin the experience. I've got a collection of Theodore Sturgeon's short stories, and by a collection, I mean the collection. It is every short story he's ever written, and I'm going to make my way through that. And I know it's going to take me a lot of my adult life because I'm not going to binge them. I'm going to chip away story here, story there, and I'm not going to read them in chronological order because I just don't feel right doing that. So it's going to be like one or two stories from this decade, one or two stories from this decade, and so on and so forth. And so yeah, just take your time with some books. Like they're worth savoring. And I think it's pretty easy when you get into a book to realize that it's either a take your time read or a turn and burn read. I mean, I'm not going to take my time reading something like Son of the Black Sword or a Brandon Sanderson novel because those are meant to be just binged. But anyways, enjoy the books you got. Savor the long ones. That doesn't sound right. Savor the books that are big, and let me know in the comments if you've got any really big tomes that you're just taking your sweet time with. I'd love to hear about them. Thanks for watching, and with that, I'll see you next time.